there, it's me, Brianna, and you are listening to Are We Caught Up Yet? Marvel Edition. You can find us on youtube.com/Save the Game Media and podcast services. If you do want to show Save the Game Media some extra love and get early access to all of our content, you can find us on patreon.com/Save the Game Media. Today I am joined by my co-host and friend, Sam. How are you today?
Perfectly fine. Mediocre, average.
Isn't that every day?
Neither good nor bad. No, because some days I'm fine in a good way, and some days I'm fine in a not so good way. But now I'm just fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
How
about you?
Oh, I'm doing good. I'm tired.
Yeah.
Tired as hell. Tired as hell.
Mm-hmm.
I'm ready for the hot weather to be done. Every time I think about going outside, I get hot because it's disgustingly hot outside right now. Not right this second. Actually, it might be hot. Hold on. I'm going to check the weather. But it's been like really hot. Let me Celsius to Fahrenheit. I don't want to do the math. It has been around 32 to 38 degrees in Celsius.
Oh.
For us Americans, that's 90 to 100.
Yeah, thank you for being sure to keep me in the loop so I know what's going on, because otherwise I just would be lost.
Yeah, you would. It's okay.
Yeah.
I hope there's good weather. Today that we're recording is Labor Day for America. I hope everybody has good weather today at least. So that way they can go outside and have their, all those dads going out in those like cargo shorts and sandals and like the polo shirt barbecuing. It's not too hot for them.
Sure.
Love it. Okay, you guys. Wait, what have you been watching? Are you watching anything?
I finished watching The Boys this season. Thought it was pretty good. I'm glad that it's ending with the next season, though. I think it's gotten to that stage where it's sort of, run its course. Might get a little bit long in the tooth if they do too much. And I'm not interested in any of the spin-off shows. I won't be watching those. So, yeah, I did that. And then I think that's it.
Just out of curiosity, what order would you rank the seasons from best to worst?
That's a whole host of assumptions on that I can remember what was in what season. I think if my brain is remembering correctly, I would say 2, 1, 4, 3 from top to bottom.
Okay.
I think that's where I sit. And then I think the only other thing I might have watched. Oh, I mean, I suppose I'll say it in passing, but I went on a bit of a video game documentary kick again. So I rewatched Raising Kratos, and I watched both Grounded and Grounded Part 2, which is, for people who don't know, obviously the God of War documentary and then the making of for both Last of Us games. Highly recommend all three.
I also, if you've already watched Last of Us like the first season, or you played like the first game, you should definitely go watch the musical.
No.
musical brings me so much joy.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
What are you talking about? It's actually so good.
Yeah, I think that's it. That's all I've watched. I've been too busy otherwise. So.
Oh, okay. Okay. I have several updates for you, Sam.
All right, get going.
Can you hear me through your headphones? If yes, then you're going to be excited to know that I played Astrobot.
A kid,
Yeah.
please.
Look how fast those headphones came back on.
Yeah. I realize I'm just extending the torture by taking the headphones off. So let's get this over with. Yeah. I'm keeping the bit up. I'm keeping it going. Just I'm trying to sort of,
So I played Astrobot. Well,
Astro's
the playroom.
Yeah.
And do you know what I said right before bed last night? This is not a joke.
No.
I said, F you, Sam.
Whoa, it's almost like I was right or something. Whoa.
That's like literally, I mean, I said the whole word, but like I was so mad. I said, F you. I hate when he's right.
I mean,
I got so mad.
Bits aside, I am just glad to be spreading the holy word of Astrobot, and how purely joyous it can be. I'm very glad that you did play it. You beaten Taylor, not that that's hard to do.
I don't have the platinum yet, but I'm at like 83% towards the platinum.
Yeah.
So
like I said,
I'm close.
It's very easy to do, but I was more just like, just play through it. You don't have to 100% it. Just experience it. Because I've said it, but like, and this sounds like an indictment on the PS5 library, but it is still one of the best PS5 games. And obviously by far the best use of the DualSense for sure.
Oh, for sure.
So yes, welcome to the holy gospel that is Team Asobi. S tier studio. Mayhaps.
Yeah.
If Astrobot nails it, I think they are in that upper echelon. They're the dark horse.
What do I want to say? There were, I mean, we can talk about it more, like with Taylor and stuff too. But I would say, like, one, I have all the extra bots, and I have literally no idea how anybody figured out how to get those, like, without a guide.
Yeah, I had to look up. I did the first two. I did Bloodborne and Celine.
That one's the hard one.
Bloodborne's easy.
What?
Well, because like I was just under the assumption that you had to peruse around, so I knew that I had heard that the first character was Bloodborne, and I knew that where the Bloodborne bot reference was, so I went there and just luckily, really, found where Maria popped up.
Yeah, that part is I'm cool with, but the part where you go to a random tree to a random clock, enter, you have to press the pause button, and then enter a random date.
Well, no, it's not a random date; it's Bloodborne's release date.
The Bloodborne DLC release date.
Sure.
That's crazy.
It's just a bit of deduction. I play so many logic deduction games. I think my brain is just automatically hardwired that way to sort of be ace attorneying it. The Celine one wasn't too bad in the grand scheme of things.
I mean, I don't think I would have gotten it without the guide, but I also think that one wasn't too bad.
I certainly had to look up the Gran Turismo one, and then the only thing I had to look up for the Ape Escape one was so that I didn't make mistakes and had to redo it, was which D-pad buttons to press for the dances.
I did do that, and I still messed it up anyways because I didn't know like 2 of the dances. I was like, I don't know what that is.
Yeah. So you then have to go get another banana, which is annoying, but
yeah.
Hey ho. Well done. I'm very, very genuinely, authentically happy that you've played it, and that you seemingly enjoyed it as much as you have. So, hooray!
Good stuff. We got the other game pre-ordered and waiting. And
Not long now.
I have what I believe to be 2 bosses left in Elden Ring. So
there you go. Nearly there.
One for the DLC and one for the final game. So. Or at least I think. I'm not 100% sure on the final game. But they're both very mean. All right, you guys. Enough about video games. Actually, I do want to say I have been watching What We Do in the Shadows. That show is very funny.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, somewhere in season 2. I can't remember where, but
New York City.
That's just so silly.
Matt Berry's great.
Sorry?
Matt Berry is excellent.
Which one is he? Oh, he's the...
What's New York City.
Laszlo.
Yeah. He's a national treasure, or becoming a national treasure.
He's very funny. He does really great delivery for a lot of his lines.
Mm-hmm.
The way that he kind of like weirdly shapes his sentences and words.
Yeah.
Very funny, I will say.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I'll ever get over the part where he like throws the dog toy off of the roof and the werewolf jumps off after. I just got the part where they've met back up. He's like, "Hey, I'm sorry about that earlier."
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get in trouble at work, but I started laughing so hard that my boss was like, "What are you doing over there?" Because I was like working and watching TV.
Yeah.
It's a good show. Anyways, I did watch another show. It's called Miss Marvel. I have feelings about this show. Many feelings. Yeah. Firstly, general thoughts. I want to preface my statement by saying, overall, I really liked this show. I had a really good time. I really enjoyed a lot of the historical context that they gave a lot of it. It is incredibly refreshing to have a story that's not white-centric / Eurocentric boringness. It felt like there was a lot of depth into the story. And a lot of history in the story. I will say, I don't know why, I can't pinpoint it, but I dreaded turning on every single episode. So I also had like a hard time with the show as much as I loved it, where I was like, man, I just don't like every time I was like, that was such a good episode. And then I was like, okay, I should watch the next episode. And I was like, oh, I don't want to watch another episode. And that happened every single time. So I don't know what that's about, but clearly I had some sort of dislike of the show within me. And I don't know where it came from. But
interesting.
Generally, I would say I really enjoyed this show. And yeah, learned history in the show as well. So it's great. What are your general thoughts, Sam?
I think it's how do I say this? I think it's a show that is ultimately greater than the sum of its parts. I think that if you look at any individual singular element of the show, it's verging on mediocre. But altogether, I think that it's certainly not exceptional or excellent, I wouldn't say. But I think that there is an unavoidable sort of charm to the show that they sort of, for the most part, authentically embody, primarily through Iman Vellani. And I think that more so than anything, her casting sort of hard carries the show. I think that there are a multitude of issues that I think would be a death knell if she wasn't as good as she is. I also think that there are, more so than most other shows that we've talked about thus far, a surprising amount of the supporting cast that are relatively bad. But there are still a few standout performances that I think are maybe not exceptional in their own right, but because they are amongst, unfortunately, mediocrity, in my opinion, I think that they sort of are elevated a little bit more optically. Yeah, I think it's an okay show that ultimately you leave feeling was good. You know, it's a weird one because I think I have more gripes with this show than I have most other shows. But I think that there are still a few things that it does very, very well.
Yeah.
That I'm still glad I've seen it, but it's simultaneously a show that I feel no inclination to go back to whatsoever.
Interesting. Yeah. It sounds like we're kind of on the same page with that. I don't know. It is interesting. Maybe through discussion I'll be able to pinpoint it a little bit more, but I do definitely understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I've ever really experienced this kind of thing with the show, where it's like this weird mixture of like I loved it, but like it was okay.
Yeah.
Okay. First thing I want to start out with, because it's what we always do, is soundtrack. I will say I did come prepared today. I generally liked the soundtrack. However, I would my playlists. And I like the music is a little bit too exciting, a little bit too upbeat to go onto my soundtrack playlist. So I enjoyed the soundtrack a lot, but I couldn't pull any of the music for like my personal playlists. I will say there was one song that's not from the OST, but like is part of like the licensed music that's kind of tied in that I did end up adding to my playlist.
Okay.
It's called Tu Mera Chand. It's from the Dilagi original motion picture soundtrack. It's like a 1949 Bollywood song that's like in one of like the openings or endings of the episodes, and I really liked that song. So that one made it into my playlist. Because I can justify listening to like adding it to other playlists. But yeah, generally really enjoyed the soundtrack. And I really enjoyed the way that they kind of it's like a hero theme, but you can clearly hear like the other themes that are kind of woven into just like the classic hero instruments. You know what I mean? Like it feels like a mixture of like that hero, like I'm sure you know what I mean.
Yeah.
What do you think about the soundtrack?
It's all right. I mean, I have to appreciate it more on some level because it not necessarily exceeds to the same extent, but I like when the OST does a good job of not only just in general differentiating itself from general superhero orchestral triumphant fodder, but also sort of embodies some of the culture and personality of the given character that the OST is supporting. So, like, you know, Shang-Chi, even Moon Knight to an extent, things like that. And also, it helps when it is a culture or cultures that have been, as of up to this point, severely severely lacking representation, or outright lacking representation entirely. So to get sort of a, I don't know if it's overtly Pakistani, but like what a ill-informed Westerner would say is a more sort of Oriental vibe to some of the music is really cool. I like that stuff. I don't know that it, again, does anything extremely special in terms of its music, but I would say that whilst I'm not even going to front, my music taste is very eclectic, and there are some of the licensed tracks that I do actually really like, which is typically the case. Like that was the same for Moon Knight and most just MCU films as well. So let me see. I'm gonna look because I don't want to get anything wrong, because I have an MCU playlist on Spotify saved with categorized by time when the products came out. So let's see, what have I saved from? Obviously, the main theme, which I think is pretty good. Then I've got Sage. I've got The Last Train, which is another OST track from when she was sent back in time. Avegi, I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation. And I think that's it. I did have Hadipa saved as well, which was the track that they were dancing to at the wedding. That's just because it's funny more than anything. So yeah, I think generally it's sort of nothing crazy to write home about, but I do still appreciate that they went somewhat out of their way to give it a slightly more unique vibe than, again, a generic Iron Man track or something, you know.
Yeah, I think that I would I think, to give everybody context, not that it super matters, but to give everybody context for what my playlist is, my soundtrack playlist I listen to mostly while I'm reading. So it has to be music that doesn't draw my attention away from my book. And just kind of like enhances the experience, or is like just like a nice background. So it's kind of what I use my soundtrack. Like I have like a best of soundtrack playlist. And that's usually what I'm using it for. Hence why like this like upbeat music doesn't really fit that well. A lot of the soundtracks don't fit well into that playlist. I apologize for the garbage truck or whatever that is in the background. And yeah, so I really do enjoy a lot of that music, but it's very exciting and upbeat and would immediately pull me away from my book. So good stuff. I think that I would really be interested to see like what instruments they use for the soundtrack. Let's see if they have anything. Music. Laura Karpman is the composer. She did What If, for anybody that is curious.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so driven by contemporary beats, dole beats, tabla beats, or both is what the quote is here. South Asian elements were achieved by a number of artists who played the sarangi, Sir Sringar, Bansuri, and Mridangam. That were recorded remotely in India and Pakistan, alongside featured soloists. There's a violinist, Raginder, and vocalist, Ganavya Doraswamy. I apologize if I mispronounced any of that. And then their sounds were combined with a 70-piece orchestra from Vienna. Interesting. Okay, well, I guess that answers that question. There are a lot of tracks, to be honest with you guys. There's 76 tracks in total in the soundtrack between the two. Good stuff. Go give it a listen. See if you want to pull any of the tracks for your soundtrack, for your playlists. This does pass the Bechdel test by a lot. Look at us, passing basic things. Making progress. Okay. How do we want to cover this? Would you like to start with the through line of the story or the characters? I'll leave that one up to you.
I'm just along for the ride.
Oh, you say that every time.
Yep.
Okay. So, you said something I found interesting. You said that you felt that some of the actors were not doing as well.
Yep.
And I'm curious who you would say is the not doing as well. Not to call them out or anything, but I actually didn't. I felt that some of it was cheesy, but I didn't think anything was overtly bad. So I'm curious how you feel. I'm curious to hear more of your feelings, I should say.
I think any of the villain characters were pretty poor, including Cameron. I've seen Rish in other things, and I think he's a good actor. It's just maybe it's the script. I don't know, but I think that the Cameron's mum as well. It's just no, it didn't work for me. I think that's more an indictment on the villains in general, and how woefully underdeveloped they were as characters. Might as well not have been there, in my opinion, for how poorly they were used, and how little of anything about them was explained.
Do you have more context, from the comics and stuff?
No, not really. I mean, so as far as I know, because they're called the clandestines in the show.
That is true.
I might be misremembering, but the clandestine were they were a family / team of superpowered people that I think were more villainous than hero. I don't know that they have any correlation to what they did with them in this show. I think they kind of just took the name and made it a different thing, which the MCU has done a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I guess as far as I know, there's nothing specific about like Jin in Marvel specifically, or like the the Noor dimension or whatever it's called. I'm pretty sure that is just sort of again sort of Southeast Asian mythology and legend and folklore and all of that. I think that is just things,
So there are some. So let's kind of do like a little bit of a deep dive here, just because I find this real stuff interesting. Because they didn't give us, like you said, they didn't really give us anything here. They're just like, we want to go home, and it's like, okay, but like, what's your home? Why were you banished? What's going on? Like that kind of thing. Okay, so they were exiled from their home in the Noor dimension. They honestly don't have much here besides what you said. Like, it's based on the Marvel Comics storyline clandestine, like CLAND, like capital D, clandestine. And then they only appear in the Marvel series, Miss Marvel. However, if you do continue through the rabbit hole, in Wikipedia to the Noor dimension, Noor actually is from something. So Noor is a term in Islamic context referring to the cold light of the night, or heatless light, i.e. the light of the moon. This light is used as a symbol for God's guidance and knowledge, a symbol of mercy in contrast to Nar, which refers to diurnal solar hot light, i.e. fire. So this is actually from the Quran. Noor is.
Yeah.
So it looks like it's from the book of Genesis. And there's a lot of there's a bunch of meanings that Noor refers to. We don't have to get too deep into the weeds of it, but it does look like this is at least somewhat based off of the Quran, even if they spell it differently. Which is interesting. I got none of that from the show.
I mean, yeah, my point is proven. Like that's all cool, but it means literally nothing in the context of the show. So it's like, again, might as well not have been there, because if you don't do anything in the way that you're presenting it to the audience, and it's just contextual knowledge or research that people have to do after the fact, it's like you mess something up there. So yeah, I think the villains in general are pretty abysmal.
Yeah, I will say I don't think I loved Najma. I was like, I think that you like from like a watch perspective, you could always tell that she like kind of had like that creepy vibe where it's like something's off here. But I also think that a lot of what they did with her story just doesn't flat out to me doesn't make sense. It's not just like a lack of like explanation. It just like I just don't get it, because she was separated, right, from what's her name? Sana? No, Aisha?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Aisha. So like they were completely separated, right? Aisha obviously went and did her own thing, married, had a kid, whatever. But when she found her, she was she was like mad. But I don't even think I understood that part, because it's like she flat out said like, I thought you guys were dead. Like, so she was just trying to live her life. And Najma like gets mad, wants this power, doesn't care about anything, so on and so forth, ends up like killing her. Like, I guess like I just, because we're missing so much of that context of like, why is this so important that you get back to this dimension? Like when you were exiled. I guess
Yeah.
like I'm just kind of like, it feels like I'm missing those like connecting pieces of like, why is this so important to you guys, to the point where like they all end up dying trying to go back to this dimension.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also kind of lose the plot almost completely when Najma dies and like question mark passes her powers to Kamran. Don't understand what happens there at all.
Yeah. I don't know.
Because it makes it seem like, because like Kamala is like, oh, your mom died to save you, but then it looks like he's being possessed by his mom. Like,
Yeah.
so I don't know what's going on. Like, I don't know. So I do think that like that plot like is very messy, and I don't understand a lot of it.
Yeah. I don't really have much more to say. I think it's just not good. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. Let's see what else. Kind of sorry, returning back to your thread about people besides the villains, is there anybody
Yeah.
else that you had beef with performance wise?
I don't think Bruno was done that well. I think of the like young actor, obviously besides Cameron, who I already said he's bundled in with the villains. I don't think Bruno was played very well. Out of the friend group, I should say, he seemed by far the least natural.
Yeah.
And that's because he is in most scenes competing against Iman, and also Yasmin Fletcher, who played Nakia, who I think is excellently done. So he's inherently at a disadvantage. And again, surely part of it is the script for the character and the way that he's written. But I don't think that was handled too well. But besides that, all the family, I think, was all great. Again, Nakia and obviously Kamala, they're all great.
I will say I did like Kamala and Nakia. I will say for Bruno, it felt like script more than anything, because it felt like, although like the acting kind of felt like cheesy, none of it felt out of place, if that makes sense. Like,
Sure.
it felt like it was purposefully cheesy. Like he was supposed to be like the dorky friend.
Yeah, I guess it maybe didn't read too well because it felt like he was another level up on the cheesiness factor
as compared to everybody else.
Everybody else, yeah.
Yeah. See, I think he was supposed to be, and I just think it didn't work.
Yeah.
Let's see. I will say I liked a lot of like Kamala's family. Like I liked the acting for like her mom, her grandma, her dad, her brother, her brother's wife. I thought a lot of that was like, it felt like authentic family
totally
vibes to me.
Yeah.
Especially I love the part where he sits down and he goes, huh, so cousin. I thought that was funny. I don't know. Enjoyed it generally.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, cool. What else do we want to? Sorry, I'm just going through like all the notes and stuff here to see what else I want to kind of talk about. Ooh, how did you feel about the red daggers?
I liked them. I again would say that like not enough of them, underutilized for the most part. And again, like I guess part of it could be construed as like, well, they're just laying the groundwork and introducing the concept and the characters and the organization, if you want to call it that. But the issue that has become more and more prominent is that because the MCU, certainly within this Disney Plus era, expanded so rapidly, there were so many projects, you're introducing so many characters and concepts and themes and places and people, and it's so hard to get back to that and pick up this thread or this thread in a timely manner, where it's like if you're not going to fully commit to it and have it be a core part of any ongoing narrative, core narrative, I feel like I don't mind it too much because I like world building, and I'm not overly fussed with things like that if I never see them again. But I think around this time we were kind of reaching a threshold where it was. So you've introduced Talo with Shang-Chi, and you've introduced the Egyptian gods and mythology and afterlife with Moon Knight, and you've introduced yada 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 and yada yada yada. It's like, okay, so now we've got like a band of like assassin vigilante people that are actually trying to do good, and they're operating in the shadows, and it's like, again, nothing about it was overtly bad, but I feel like it was just sort of, it felt almost shoehorned into the show as like, hey, we've got this thing. And I like, how Kamala interacted with them. That was all good. Like the dialogue and dynamics there were pretty good, I would say. But I don't know realistically whether for the core conceit of the show they were necessary. I feel like you probably could have taken out them and utilized the runtime for something else that was a little more central to the core ethos, theme, plot line of the story. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't have a crystal ball to know what other versions of the show look like. But I do feel like I would have much preferred, for example, more time spent overtly developing and exploring the clandestines than getting the red daggers. So I like the red daggers more than the clandestines, but I think that's the issue, that the clandestines are far more quintessentially important to the story as it exists than the red daggers are, but the red daggers are presented better. So
yeah, I mean, the thing is that I feel like the only thing that they really use the red daggers for is like, we need somebody to explain what's going on to Kamala.
Well, exactly what I mean. Yeah, they just shoehorn them in. So it's like, oh, it's a cool reference for the people that know, and they've got some cool visual design going on with the red masks and stuff, and then they are just used as an exposition machine. It's like, come on, you could have. Surely there was something.
And then murdered them.
Done. Yeah.
And then murdered them. Yeah. I don't know. I think that I definitely agree with what you're saying about like how the red daggers are much more interesting, but one can't exist without the other. I do think that there's a version of this show that exists somewhere where they were actually used for storytelling rather than just dumping information. And I think that would have made much more sense. I feel like making the clandestines like maybe like a much more like, we don't know what's going on, like kind of anonymous threat to Kamala, and then maybe introducing the red daggers, and then they kind of provide information for everything and then help her. I think that would have made more sense, but I think we would have had to stay with them for a lot longer. Like, I think we would have had to go to Karachi like in episode 2 and maybe stay a bit longer. I don't know. Don't like it. They're also known as the Order of the Red Daggers. Ooh. Okay, let's see. What else did I want to talk about? Okay, one thing I did want to talk about was the magic. Also incredibly non-specific.
Hmm.
They don't really explain what's going on with Kamala's magic. I will say I enjoyed the idea of her magic, especially when she started getting used to it. However, the CGI was not the best. So it's
Mhm.
kind of a suspense of disbelief for a lot of it for me.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the magic in this?
This is probably like the most contentious thing about the show, because if you know Miss Marvel, Miss Marvel doesn't have any of these powers.
Oh,
Um,
oh,
very famously doesn't have any of these powers. Miss Marvel in the comics, and you'll know if you play Crystal Dynamics' hit game Avengers.
nope.
She can like stretch her arms, her limbs. She can like stretch herself. She's like stretchy,
Oh, so
and
like the
she can,
Incredibles.
and she, yeah, and but she can also like enlarge different parts of her body. So like she can stretch out her arm, and it can go like
So
super long distance,
so
and
what
then
Kamala does,
big
but
enough
her
for it.
actual body.
Yes, exactly.
And minus the platforms and stuff.
Yeah, and she can like just make her entire self bigger.
Okay.
Like an Ant-Man type thing,
Okay.
not smaller. She can't go smaller, but she can go bigger. So that was a very contentious thing leading up to the show coming out, because they were like, "Well, we've changed what she can do," and we're like, well, "Why would you do that?" And then people were like, "Well, it's probably because doing the whole stretchy thing would be really expensive." And I'm like, "Well, okay, I guess, and it might look a little bit weird if you don't have
It
a
would
common
look
budget,
weird.
maybe, but." Then it doesn't really make sense, because we're in the here and now, and we knew this was going to happen at the time as well. We were getting Fantastic Four, and don't know if you know people, Mr. Fantastic, very famously stretchy.
Oh
Like,
yeah, he's the guy that got like all weird at the. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
yeah, played now, of course, in the main MCU
Not John
universe.
Krasinski.
No, and you know who it is. But I'm not going to utter his name, because we'll
Then I start barking.
have issue. Yeah. So we were sort of like, well, and then it had us concerned, because then we were like, well, does that mean that you're going to change what Mr. Fantastic can do? And we still, I guess, technically don't know that they aren't going to change that, but they would have probably told us by now, because Fantastic Four is filming. So there was a lot of like, not sure if this is going to work. And I don't mind it too much, the change. I like the fact that the magic is seemingly to some extent like inherently within her, but is enhanced and is then able to be wielded and manipulated with the bangle. I like that, because not that what she had in the comics with the stretchy stuff wasn't unique inherently to herself in the beginning, but making it the bangle that she got from her grandma is something that I think grounds it a little bit better in terms of how narrow and focused this story is. It's not some world-ending plot. It is sort of like a very familial conflict going on. So I do like that. I think it was handled relatively well. I obviously agree that the visuals aren't quite there. I do think, though, that they look cool. Like, I like that it is sort of like shiny and refraction-y, and like it's called hard light in the show, and going forwards, creating like hard light constructs. So I like sort of like crystallizing light. I like that conceptually. I just think they didn't quite refine it properly in terms of visuals. But that doesn't really matter. Like suspension of disbelief, you can do that. And I do like that they at least, in part, have her, depicting and referencing her actual powers by making the fists bigger and stuff like that. I like that. Because I think you kind of need that at the very least if you're going to change her powers to that extent.
Yeah.
I guess going back to your point about the magic and stuff, and I guess a reason that they actually changed the powers, in part at least, was because typically, and I don't know how much you remember of what we've spoken about in weeks past, Kamala is technically a inhuman, which is what I said about that show that was god awful, which Black Bolt came from Multiverse of Madness, the dude who can't speak. She is one of those, or she was a regular person and then got exposed to that mist that the Inhumans use to awaken their powers, and that's how she sort of inherently became an Inhuman. But it's very clear the MCU right now doesn't want anything to do with Inhumans because of that bad mojo, bad reputation. So they changed it, and obviously by the end of the show, set up and insinuate that she is a mutant, which is X-Men, which is again a very big deviation, and you wouldn't have caught it probably, but when Bruno went, "You've got a mutation," they did play a little riff of the X-Men theme.
Oh, there's no way I would have caught that.
Yeah. Which is the same music that played when Patrick Stewart came in Multiverse of Madness, which is the X-Men theme from the 90s animated show. Yeah, that's just all the context out of the way. But I think it's fine. I feel very indifferent about it. There are a lot of people that are very up in arms that they weren't authentic to Kamala, because in the comics, Kamala is still like a very vivid, avid fan of Carol Danvers. That is her shtick, and just heroes in general. But she gets the powers, and she's sort of excited to begin with, but then she realizes that, she sort of morphs and changes her body, and she is sort of a little bit disgusted with herself in the way that it makes her look. And she thinks she's a bit of a freak, and she just wants to be like Carol. And in the comics, she can, even to the extent, use her powers to almost fully augment her appearance, like almost shapeshift, kind of. And then the whole premise of the initial comic run was her learning to accept herself and to be like, no. I should be a Pakistani American hero. Like, I am who I am. I should embody that and cherish and celebrate that, not try to hide it, who I am and where I'm from and what I can do.
Yeah.
And that is lost in the show with the changes. That doesn't have me as up in arms as it does other people, because I still like this iteration of Kamala. But I still, on the flip side, understand why people feel that it is maybe doing her a little bit of a disservice to just give her what some might say is just more generic, sparkly powers. But, that was very long-winded.
That's okay. That's what we're mostly here for, right? Is you ranting about Marvel?
Well, I mean, context is important. So
it is. I found something while you were talking. I was listening, I swear. Just more of like, I was looking because you started talking about like the characters, so I clicked on her wiki page. The character was conceived during a conversation between Marvel editors Sana and Steven, which is interesting because Miss Marvel's mom is named Sana.
Mhm.
Just wanted to point that out. Thought that was cool. Let's see. Okay.
Well, no, Kamala's grandmother, right?
Oh yeah,
'Cause
grandmother.
Kamala's mom is Maniba.
No. Sana is her mom, I believe. Right? Hold on.
No, I'm pretty sure Sana is
Let me click on this.
Kamala's
Yes, you are
grandma.
correct. Yes. You are correct. Too many generations. 4 generations.
Mhm.
And 1 film.
Yeah.
Okay. There are a couple of other things that I wanted to chat about. I'm sure other things will come up as I start talking. One, I wanted to talk about, like, not necessarily like the actual history, but just more of like, I found it really interesting that they included real history in this show, and they like very directly included it
Mhm.
with like it was almost like a news segment of like what happened during partition.
Mhm.
I thought that was really interesting. And I can't think of any other examples where that's kind of been used for Marvel, at least. And I really enjoyed that. I'm glad that they like included that history because I know as an American, our teaching is garbage. Our history is garbage. We don't know anything besides like the most basic of American history, and what we do know of American history is a lot of lies. But we don't have to get into all of that. But I'm really glad that they included this context because I had heard of partition and had a generic idea, but to get like not like heavy details, but like a lot more details to kind of explain what's going on and like kind of set the scene and set the context. I think that was really important. And I do also I think that it's important for people to know. And so I think that it's an interesting way to kind of provide people with that history.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to point that out because I thought it was cool.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, it makes sense because when you're talking again about so many generations and lineage and family, which is sort of like the core conceit of the show, as it's structured, and like legacy and heritage and inheritance and all of these things, which I guess in some way what I was talking about before of like Kamala accepting who she is and choosing to represent rather than hide her truth and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think, but by proxy, this aspect of the show does tackle that a little bit, but just a little less overtly.
Yeah.
In terms of relation directly to Kamala
Yeah.
and her internal feelings. But yeah, no, I think it's very powerful, not only from like an educational standpoint of telling people in a dramatized sense what partition was and how it affected people, but also again kind of grounding the story a bit, because again so much of the narrative with the clandestines and different dimensions and everything, it can sort of get away from the closeness of the rest of the narrative.
Yeah. It's
And I
very
feel
easy to
like,
lose the plot.
yeah, I feel like this stuff is where the show is at its best
Yeah.
by a large margin.
I will say, like, I think part of the reason why I connected with the show so much and why I think I enjoyed it is because I very recently have been having my own personal experiences with like kind of understanding my family history and stuff like that. we don't have to get super into it, but I will say that there were some things that really kind of stood out to me. One, like I think like the feeling of like losing your I don't know how do I want to say this. The feeling of like losing your culture in like something like partition where my grandma was born in Jerusalem, and my grandma's sister still has the key to her house in Jerusalem. And it's been very hard for me to kind of come to terms recently with the fact that I won't ever be able to go, most likely won't ever be able to go to where my grandparents like grew up and like experience their history and their stories. So there's kind of like that loss of culture, which I think is kind of what they touched on with partition, where it's like they had to leave everything behind. Another thing that I really connected with in the show was like her going to her grandma's house for the first time. I just recently, like last year, had this experience. I didn't go to my grandma's house because my grandma sold her house when she moved to America. But I did go to her sister's house, so like my great aunt. And it was very interesting to see, like, essentially, like what is like my family's home, right? Where like it's multiple generations living in one home, like where the house is kind of stacked on top of each other. There's a lot of history in the house. There's like they've had that house for many, many years now. I think they've owned that house for like 50 or 60 years now, 50, something like that. And they've like built up on that house, and the house is it's one of the most beautiful houses I've ever seen. And yeah, and like kind of reconnecting with my family in that way and like visiting. I don't know. Like I like her like coming into that house for the first time and like seeing the house like that like really resonated with me because I just very recently had this experience. So I thought that was like a really cool thing with the show, even though they are like the Nakba and partition are of course very separate things, but I think that there are themes that kind of are similar across the two.
Yeah.
So that was my thoughts and experience on that, and I wanted to just point it out just because it was interesting for me, and kind of weirdly emotional, not like in a crying emotional way, but like I don't know, just kind of like sat heavy on my chest, kind of emotional way. So
yeah.
One of the other things I wanted to talk about was the Department of Damage Control, which is, of course, a subunit of S.H.I.E.L.D., even though S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't necessarily exist anymore. It's kind of like a split off. So a couple things I wanted to talk about. One, they kind of suck. I don't know if it's just like the perspective of like this show or if they just in general suck. But they kind of suck. And the other thing I wanted to touch on with this, and we can kind of wrap it up together, talk about it separately, however you want to tackle it. But I do want to like point out, like, and I find it very interesting that they specifically talked about this, where they're like, oh, we're used to like the government raiding our mosques and stuff. Like, this is an actual thing that happens. It's like well documented that like the FBI and police and stuff will basically just sit and creep in a very, very, very awful way on the Muslim American communities and like raid their mosques, like interrupt their like worshiping, like stuff like that. Like it's very well documented and well known, especially with the FBI, that they have like really treated Muslim Americans horribly. And I thought it was so interesting that they like included it and like almost flat out said it, even though it was kind of like a skirt. It wasn't like a full skirt around. It was like they were so close to almost just like flat out saying like the FBI sucks. That like I was really shocked that they did that. I was pleasantly surprised, and it was just very interesting. How do you feel about
Yeah.
Department of Damage Control and all of that?
I mean, my opinions are relatively superficial because obviously I don't really have any meaningful knowledge about the real world correlation, but it's the Department of Damage Control is a nice thing, I think, that serves as a good background through line through some of the more I would say lower tier stories in the MCU, like
Yeah, I just looked at the list.
being introduced.
Spider-Man.
Yeah,
Right.
Spider-Man: Homecoming. That they shut down Vulture's salvage operation after the Battle of New York, and then the one of the DODC agents, played by Aaron Moyad, who is excellent in Succession and in his subsequent appearances as this character. He was in No Way Home as well. He was interrogating Peter not Peter, MJ. And
That's where I was like, I swear to God, he's been in these shows before, but I couldn't place it. Thank you.
Yeah. So he was there. That was his first appearance, and then obviously he reappears here. I think it's interesting that I don't know. I don't need to go down the rabbit hole in terms of the narrative with the Department of Damage Control, but I do think it's interesting that a initiative that Tony established, again with the intention of helping people and clean up messes and solve the problems that are inherently and inadvertently caused by superheroes, is becoming, especially post Tony's death, a bit more of a nefarious organization. Again, not that they're overtly evil. I think that there are just certainly the female agent in particular in the show clearly is sort of bloodthirsty, it seems.
Yeah, damn.
So I think more so than anything, it's probably like a few bad eggs type thing. But again, if you're talking about real world correlations, it's like, well, even if it is ultimately just a few bad eggs, that can really cripple
That's why
any organization, or at least the optical perception of said organization.
Yep. That's why it's always funny to me with like the bad apple. They're like, oh, it's just a couple bad apples, but it's like, what's the full phrase? The full phrase is bad apple spoils the bunch.
Yeah, so I like that they are a recurring thing, and that they show up in places that would make sense. I like that. I think that is a very inherent way of doing that fine narrative thread that keeps going, that ultimately is completely inconsequential to anybody that isn't aware of their previous appearances or where they came from. They're just an evil government organization, but it is a payoff for fans who have been watching and keeping up with everything. So, but yeah, beyond that, I don't have too much to say. There's nothing inherently unique about them in the way that they're presented in this show that would differentiate them from generic government organization number 42. So, which is unfortunate because I think there are ways of making the Department of Damage Control a little bit more compelling, or at least unique. But I also don't think that this show demands that for how they're used. They just needed an antagonistic force from the more lawful, authoritative side that brushes up against everybody else. I think that it serves its purpose fine, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay, so I did pull it up, just because I thought it was just because I think it's very pertinent and I think it's interesting. So specifically, the one that's most well documented is the FBI spied on Orange County Muslims, and they like got sued over it. You can look it up if you want. There's like a whole like thing that they documented how it affected their lives, that they were like followed around by the FBI for a long time. And I believe Hassan Minhaj, I think is how you say his last name, does either a comedy bit about it or he did one of his episodes on it. He's a Muslim American comedian. So if anybody is curious to learn more about that, that is what I was referring to. Let's see, DODC. Let's see. Is there anything else I wanted to? I'm so glad that Cleary got fired. Like, if she hadn't been fired, I probably would have been very mad. But I'm glad she got fired. I will leave it there. But yeah, I think that the Department of Damage Control is not doing well. I did think it was interesting that he was like, the publicity. Anyways, I do not like government organizations. Let's see what else we want to talk about. Is there anything that is through line that we need to know for anything coming ahead? I don't think so, besides like what we generally discussed, but just checking since you're the keeper of the knowledge.
Well, I mean, clearly something happened at the very end with Carol.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep. That's
what
true.
Happened?
I have literally no idea.
She just like catapulted herself into her wardrobe and then out popped Carol.
Yep.
Wonder if that's going to be relevant.
I assume it will at some point.
Yeah. It's almost like there's a film in the not too distant future called The Marvels.
Oh, is that a film? I thought that was a TV show for some reason.
No.
Okay, good to know.
Think of it as Captain Marvel 2 for all intents and purposes.
Okay, cool. Ranking next.
I will say, just before the ranking, another thing that does disappoint me, not to end it on a, well, I guess it doesn't really matter because I do have a lot of negative things to say about the show as much as I still like it. Something that is worth pointing out that I am really disappointed by is that, especially in the first episode, there were a lot of very unique visual things that they did.
Mm-hmm.
With special effects and cool little like thought bubbly, not specifically thought bubbles, but thought bubbly type stuff, and all of the sketches and writings and stuff that Kamala does, and even I think it was the first episode. I can't remember if it was or not, but even just the interesting camera work where she was stood in front of like a neon sign behind her,
Mm-hmm.
and it sort of the camera lost its focus and blurred, and the neon just turned into lots of little hearts. Stuff like that. That's really cool. And again, very indicative of what her character is like and how it's depicted in the comics. I feel really robbed that basically after the first episode, all of that became essentially non-existent.
Until the very last one, yeah.
Like it just disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, again, not pivotal to the show working or not, but I feel like the show certainly wouldn't have suffered if they had kept up.
Yeah,
Some of that throughout.
I have a feeling that one has to do something either with budget or time, because like one is very time consuming to do stuff like that, and two can cost a lot to do those kinds of animations.
Well, I mean, I also that might factor in. I would also say that episode 1 and episode 6 were directed by the same people.
Interesting.
And all the episodes in between were directed by other people.
That
So
could definitely have something to do with it, but
goes to show that the first episode and the last are the ones that do have a lot of that visual flair. And you could say that's a coincidence because it's the beginning and end of the story, so it's a nice little bow being wrapped up. But I also do think that it is probably something to do with the creatives that are sort of making the choices and storyboarding and setting up the shots and everything. But even with that, I would have liked if the CGI and special effects teams were a bit more cohesive in the interim there, because I feel like it would have only benefited the show to have, not necessarily to the same frequency, but just splashes of it in every episode. I think it would have, in the same way that it enhanced practically every scene that it was used in the 2 episodes that it was used, it would have inherently done the same for the middle episodes as well. And I feel that the show only suffers as a result of not having that thing that does make it even more unique.
yeah, I would agree with that.
So I would love to see a version of the show where it does keep up that visual storytelling element.
That
that
would
is
be
something.
like a fun way to like re-release the show, because they wouldn't have to do anything. They would just like in terms of like re-editing the actual show itself, they could just do the art
Sure.
over the show.
Sure. And like, I guess you could make an argument that in the middle chapters of this story, it does become a little bit more serious. Like, you obviously wouldn't have that stuff over all the Indian partition stuff, obviously.
Yeah.
But there are still plenty of segments in episode 2, 3, 4 where it could have been utilized and wouldn't have felt out of place. So yeah, I wanted to raise that because I feel like it is something that not a lot of people talk about, because it feels like it's there and then it's not, and then it's there at the end again really quickly. So people don't highlight it too much. But I think that it gave such a great first impression, and then it disappeared, which is very strange. But what can you do?
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. So for ranking, I put mine towards the bottom of the list, not end to end. So I put it at spot number 28. So that is below Iron Man 2 and above What If Season 1. Where are you going to put yours?
I'm checking because I made a note as I was watching, because I knew specifically where I was going to put it. I have it at what is it? It would be 25.
Okay, so above Ant-Man, below Thor?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Sam, I do have a question for you. What are we watching next?
Yes.
Do you like how I remembered to ask? Very mindful.
Yeah.
Very demure.
Weird. It's the one time you ask is the one time I've forgotten what's next. So let me just. I'll check that for you.
Thank you. Thanks for checking. Do you mind if I read the patron list while you do that?
Sure.
All right. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us today. We'll tell you what we're watching next in just a second. Special shout out to our current patrons. We have Alpaca Tom, Fabulous Brianna, Brianna's mom, Brianna's brother, Lindsay, Nikolai at Night, Cypher, Primus, Brendan Myers, Marcus O'Neill, Lillian, Mimi J, David Hartright, Dave Harp, the Xbox Expansion Pass, Lee Navarro, Silicanet, Ellery Woods Parker III, Shelby Massey, Chad, and Rick Davis. New name on the end there. Thank you, Rick, for your support. We really appreciate you joining the reincarnation. Sam, what was the next thing?
The next thing is Thor: Love and Thunder.
Oh no. Okay.
Oh dear, that's you don't like Thor?
I do like Thor.
No, well, now I'm very confused.
I've just heard bad things about this film.
Oh dear.
And I don't want to dislike Thor. So that's why I sighed, because I was like, I don't know if it's good or bad. I've just heard not good things.
Maybe.
And I haven't even heard anything specific. It was just like, oh, I didn't like it. So who knows? Maybe I'll like it.
We'll see.
We shall see.
Do I like it?
Who knows? I know you won't tell me, so I'm not even going to try. Okay. Thank you guys for hanging out with us today. We appreciate you. We will see you guys in 2 weeks with our review of Thor: Love and Thunder. Sam, where can people find you?
Anywhere and everywhere at Sam Heaney, Heaney.
You can also find us in the Discord if you want. Links in the description. You can find me at Fabulous Brianna, FABULAST BREANNA. You can find Save the Game Media at Save Game Media on Twitter, and then Save the Game Media everywhere else. Join the Reincarnation, aka our patron list. Is there anything else I want to mention? We are doing Extra Life this year, which is a charity stream that lasts for 24 hours. We'll be doing that in November. You can start donating now if you want. You can always wait if you want. But the donation link will be in the description as well. Okay, see you guys later. Bye.